Hello and welcome to my studio. In this video I'm going to recap some tips and techniques that I've used over the past year to produce these pictures. None of these tips and techniques are particularly difficult to implement, and most don't need a great deal of equipment. But the results can really speak for themselves. I'm going to start with this picture of an orange segment. I made this image to demonstrate just how effective a surface reflection can be, and also to show a light stacking technique, as the finished image is a composite of two slightly different lighting setups. On this table I've placed a sheet of glossy perspex. Now this has the attribute that it will give a surface reflection. So unlike if I placed the subject, which in this case is a segment of an orange, on a mirror, you'd actually get two reflections. One from the surface of the glass and the second reflection from the backing to make the mirror. This way you end up with just one crisp reflection. Okay, so to light this then, what I want to do is actually bring out all the texture and the detail in the orange here. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is virtually backlight it. So I'm going to put a fairly small studio head about here somewhere. So in this position here, it is, as you can see, behind the subject, so it's going to backlight it. So that should, as we said, bring out the detail in this. And just at an arbitrary energy level, I'll grab an image and we'll just see what we get. Well, the exposure is actually fairly close without doing anything at all. I think maybe one stop more might do. I can see that I've got a little bit of flare coming in at the top of the image here. So just to get rid of that, I'm just going to use a flag. So just a piece of cardboard in a lab stand, and we'll just place that just over the top of the lens there. And that should eliminate that flare. And then as far as the exposure, we'll just add a stop and see what that looks like. Yes, that seems to have done it. Okay, so in this capture, the actual orange segment itself is well exposed, but the reflection is a little lacking. So what I'm going to do is just move the light ever so slightly further forwards, so that I end up starting to light the surface as well as the back. If I just move this relatively small distance like that, and now grab another image without doing anything else, there, you can see that we've got a huge difference in the reflection here. And also, what I want to do is compensate for that being a reflection. So I'm going to actually add another stop. So the reflection is now looking good, but this is now all burnt out along the top here. But by using the previous capture and combining the two images in Photoshop, I can make one image which has the attributes of both. So here we are in Photoshop, and I've loaded up the two images that I captured earlier. So I have this one where we have the segment itself exposed correctly, and then this one where I moved the light and also increased the exposure on the reflection. So the first thing to do is to make a stack of these two images. So go to File, down to Scripts, across to Load Files into Stack. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do then is just combine these two images. And the easy way to do that would just be to add a layer mask to the top one here, like so, and just invert that layer mask to hide that layer. There we are. So now wherever I paint in white on this mask will reveal that image. So just make sure that white is selected as your foreground color. Go for a paintbrush, and now I can just paint in the previous image like that. And that now combines the two. There we are. So that's with that layer on, and that's without it. So that's overexposed, and that's about right. Good. Now, as you can probably see in this image, one of the downsides to using a piece of perspex is that it does attract quite a lot of dust. Now, you could go along and spend hours cleaning it, or you could just do it in post-production, which is what I'm going to do. So to clean up the image, I'm just going to add another layer, like so, and literally paint on this layer in black. So making sure black's selected, I've got a paintbrush here, and initially I'm just going to go around fairly roughly the two orange segments, like so. There we are. Now if I turn off these two layers, this is what I've ended up with. So I just basically need to just colour in the rest of this all in black. There we are. So now if I turn on the two layers, we end up with a nice clean background. So that's with that layer active, and that's without. And there we have it. So by backlighting the translucent subject, it's possible to bring out the detail within that subject. And then by using a stacking technique, I've added two separate lighting setups together to produce the final image. In the next example, I've given this image more interest by including the reflection in the water. This also gives an additional narrative to the falling leaf subject. The whole thing is lit with a single flash. However, a number of simple techniques make capturing the image considerably easier. Okay, so at this time of the year, there's quite a lot of falling leaves around. So I've collected a few, and I've picked one in particular, and I've mounted that just on a piece of wire. I think you can just about make this out. And I've put the whole thing in a clamp just to make it easier to manipulate. So this is literally just stuck on the end of this piece of wire, just with a little blue tack. Okay, so that's going to be our subject. And to give us the reflection, I'm just going to use this baking tray. And I'm just going to put that on here and put some water in here. There we go. You don't need a great deal of water, just enough to cover the base of the tray, really. Right. So now we can just place the subject roughly in the right place, roughly in position. Something like that, just over the water. So, to light this, what I'm going to do is actually place a flash around the back here. So here we have a studio flash, just with some barn doors on it. I'm just going to place that about here. Now if I used it in this manner, in fact what I'll do is take a picture with it like this, and you'll see that we'll end up with a reflection of this light in the water. Okay, so with that about set, what I can do is just at an arbitrary energy level, I'll grab an image and we'll see what we get. Okay, and sure enough, we've got a reasonable reflection of the light in the water here. But that's not really what we want. We want something a bit more graduated. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is add some diffusion material in front of this, about here somewhere. So here we are. This is 216 diffusion material. I'm just going to pull that down in front of the light. Like so. Okay, so with that in position, I'll grab that image again and we'll see what it looks like this time. Yes, there we go. That's considerably more like the sort of image that I want. And just looking at the image on the screen here, I think it's ever so slightly a little bit blue. So I'm just going to use the software here just to set the color balance. So I'll just pick this bit at the back here, which I want to appear as grey, and I'll just use that as the set point. There we go. Yes, that's a bit better, isn't it? Okay, so that's the basic image, and the exposure may be altered a little bit as we go along. So the next thing that I want to do is introduce some disturbance in the water, so some drips going into it. Now there's lots of different ways to do this, but one of the simplest, which works very well most of the time, is just to use an old polythene bag. And what I've got here is a bag, and I've made a hole in the corner here, and I've partially covered that with some black sticky tape. I think you can just see on the bag. So it'll just limit the water as it goes through it. Okay, so we'll just put some water in the bag. There we are, and you should be able to see that that is now dripping out of the corner just as I want. There we go. So all I need to do now is suspend this above the tray here, and that will just drip into the tray, and I can use that as the disturbance in the water. So just to support the bag, I'm just going to use this lab stand. Pop that in there. There we go. And now I can position this so that it's just in front of the leaf. So we'll just grab an image and see what it looks like. So it's all a bit hit and miss. Give that a go. See if that was anywhere near the right place. Okay, so you can see that we're starting to get there. We've got a bit of disturbance going on. Okay, so now it's just a case of carrying on and taking a few pictures, and one of them will have the drop in the right place that I want. Okay. Okay, so if I just go back through the ones that I've just captured, that's a particularly nice one, and that's good too, and I like that one. So those three are really the sort of thing that I want. So what I'm going to do now is take these three images, which I've now captured, and put them into Photoshop, and I'll combine them together. Okay, so here I am in Photoshop, and I've loaded up the three images that I captured earlier. So the first job would be just to combine all these three into one file, and the easy way to do that would just be to use the file script load files into stack command. So what this will do is just make me a new file at the top here, and each of the images is now on a separate layer. So I can now dispense with the camera originals. So this is the file that I'll be editing. And I think the first obvious thing would be just to remove the support in each of these images. Now there's various different ways that this can be done, but the simplest would be just to use generative fill. So with the top layer selected, what I'm going to do is just go to the lasso tool. So I'll just draw very roughly around the area that I want to make a fill for. That. There we go. We'll just click on generative fill. And there we are, it's made three variants, so I can have a look at each one, and I think I'll go with that one. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so having done that for the main support, I'll also do the same thing for the reflection down here. So now I'll just go on to the image itself, make sure that layer is selected, and I'll just tidy up the very small amount which is left. So I'll just zoom in to 100% and just select white as my foreground color. Pick a paintbrush. There we are, we just removed the support. I'll just zoom all the way back out again and just do the same for the reflection. And now just to combine all these three, what I'm going to do is just turn the other layers off. So I've just got these three selected, and what I'm going to do is just make a stamp of those three active layers. So hold down the Shift key, the Control key, the Alt key, and just press the E key. And that has now made me a stamp of those, so I don't need those ones anymore. So I can now just do the same thing to the next layer, which is this one. So once again, select that layer, use the lasso tool just to remove the support again, and also remove the reflection. And then finally just do the same to the very last image. There we go. So with those 3 layers now edited, what I can do is get rid of all the others because we don't really need them anymore. So I'll just select them and delete them. And if we go onto the top layer here, so I'll select that and change the blending mode from normal to darker color, that will combine those 2 layers together. And now do the same on the second layer. There we are. So with just a few simple techniques, it's possible to create quite a striking image with a dynamic element to it. Now the next trick. By removing any visible means of support, your subject will appear to float in space. So in order to achieve that, what I'm going to do is use this small piece of welding rod, and I'm going to just pierce the garlic at the back here, and by doing that, if this is now pointing at the camera, the subject itself will hide the support, the welding rod. Okay, so to get all this to work, what I'm going to do is just use a piece of cloth like this, and first of all I'm just going to place the welding rod through the cloth like that. Why I'm doing that will become apparent a little later. So now just put the garlic on the end of the rod, like so. And now to support all this, I'm just going to use a retort stand. Here we go. Place this on here. So now I can now use this piece of cloth just to hide most of the retort stand. And I'll just put a clip on that. So next thing to do would be just to have a look at the subject from the camera's point of view. As it comes round, there is a point where the support is completely hidden by the subject. And that is what we want. So with all that bit set, the next thing to do is think about how it's going to be lit. I'm going to use this very small flash head, and I'm going to place it about here somewhere. So this has been placed at this very close distance, so that due to the inverse square law, we don't get a great deal of exposure on the background down here. The other thing to bear in mind is that the exit diameter of this is about 100 millimeters, and this is about 100 millimeters away from the subject. So with this bit of scale, this will appear as a huge softbox, so it should be quite a soft light we get. Okay, so having set all that up, the next thing will be to set up the camera. So this is the camera that I'll be using, and this is a 5x4 inch technical camera. But you can actually change the back on this. So what I'm going to do is I'll set up the shot using this camera and then change out the focusing screen at the back here for a digital camera. Okay, so let's just point this at the subject. I'll just wind this round. There. Okay, so now as I turn the camera, you should be able to see the image move around on the ground glass screen on the back. So I can just line that up and just get it in the center. If I used a full frame format, then this is the amount of image which would be captured by that particular sensor. Now in this case, I'm going to use a true medium format sensor, and that will allow this amount of the image to be captured. Okay, so with all that now set, I can dispense with the modeling light, and I'll just take the back off this camera. There we are. So I'm just going to replace that with this medium format sensor. So this is 80 megapixel. So it will give quite a large detailed file. Just place that in there like so. and then just reattach the bellows with nothing more complex than a couple of pieces of sticky tape. So now with that changed, what I can do is I'll plug this camera in and we'll use the software here, which is Capture One software, just to control the camera. So it has a shutter speed of 1/100th of a second, ISO of 100, and it's showing an aperture of f/16. But there is no connection between the lens on this camera and the camera itself. So that is just a default. The camera lens is actually set to 5.6, which is its maximum aperture. Okay, so with those settings and no flash turned on at the moment, what I'll do is grab an image and just make sure I don't get any contamination from the house lights. And there we are. We can see that we're just getting the smallest amount of image there. But that, of course, is at maximum aperture, and I won't be using this at maximum aperture. I'll be using it at something like f/16. So let's just put f/16 on the lens. There we are. So now with the lens set, let's just grab that again, and it should be completely black, which it is. Okay, so now any light which I add from here will be the only light which affects the subject. So let's just turn on the flash sync trigger to fire the flash, and we'll just grab an image and see what we get this time. There we are. So that's starting to get there. It's possibly a little bright, and also the bottom of the garlic bulb here could do with a little bit of filling in. Okay, so we'll just take one stop of energy out of the flash, and to fill in the bottom of the subject, what I'm going to use is a card flag. So here I have a white card flag. I'm just going to place that in another retort stand. So with that in place, that should just bounce a little bit of this light back into the subject again. Let's just grab that and see what we get this time. Yes, that's much better. If I compare it to the previous image, this was all a little bright, and now that's all got turned down, and all this has become filled in. So by carefully arranging the support to be directly behind the subject, it's the subject itself which will hide the support. In the next example, to make an object appear to float convincingly isn't really that difficult. It just requires a few tricks and techniques. Okay, so I'm going to start with the set around the subject itself. So basically here I've just put a piece of wood on top of this table just to make it a little bit bigger. Then on top of this, I'm just going to place a piece of very matte perspex. There we are. Now I'm using this particular type of surface on purpose so that I don't get any unwanted reflections. Okay, so the next thing would be a towel, like this. I'm just going to place this on here, something like that. Now this actually serves two purposes. The first is it gives a light surface so that the underside of the subject will be lit. And the second is that it will give a surface on which I can project a shadow from the subject itself. Right, so to set up the subject, what I'm going to do is just place a couple of pieces of wood like this to support a piece of glass. Now this is just an old glass shelf. You can use anything for this. We're actually going to be taking it out of the picture at the end, so the quality of the glass doesn't really matter. Okay, so something like that. And then on top of here, I place the subject. There we go, there. So with those in position then, if I place a light somewhere up here, it's going to cast a shadow onto this tea towel. Okay, so for the light I've got this small flash head in this softbox. I'm just going to place this almost directly over the top. I don't want it completely over the top, otherwise the shadow may well be a little boring. So I'm just going to take that just up in the air a bit. There we are, something like that anyway. Okay, so with the light in position, final thing to do would be to add a background along here somewhere. Okay, so with all this now set, that's the set built. So the next thing to do would be to think about the camera position. So what I'm going to do is place a tripod about here somewhere. There we are. Now I have to use a tripod for this because I'm going to use two captures to produce the final image. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this on the top of the tripod like that. There we go. There we are, the camera's all on now, and the Capture One software has recognized the camera, and it's showing me the settings that I have on the camera at the moment. So I have the camera in full manual mode. I'm using a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second. Now that is the flash sync speed for the focal plane shutter in this camera. And it's relatively slow as far as digital cameras are concerned. So I will need to do a test just to make sure that I don't get any contamination from the house lights, but I'll come to that in a moment. So the rest of the settings, I've just got a sensitivity of 100 ISO, and I've got an aperture here set at f11. So for that test that I mentioned, I'm actually going to widen out the aperture to its maximum, which is 2.8. So 2.8 would be the worst case, if you like. There we are. Okay, so with no flash turned on yet, what I'm going to do is just take an image and see what we get. There. Now with those settings, there's virtually no image there at all, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so the next stage would be to turn the flash on and get a test exposure with the flash. And there we are, straight away you can see that we're in the right ballpark in terms of exposure, and the shadow underneath here isn't quite as pronounced as I would like. So that's the first thing to address. So in order to do that, all I'm going to do is move this further away. That will in effect make the size of this from the object's point of view smaller. Therefore the shadow will be more pronounced. So all I'm going to do is just raise this up in the air like this. There we are. So at that sort of height I'm going to need a little more energy in the system. So I'm just going to add one stop to the flash energy. Okay, so now you can see that the shadow has become a lot more prominent, much more like what we want. The exposure is possibly a little low. I could bring it up another stop. So that's what I'm going to do. Yes, that's brought it up nicely. Okay. So that's the first of our two images captured. So the next image will be just a blank frame really, with just the tea towel. And I'm just going to remove everything else. There we are. So with that all done, what I'll do now is just grab that again. And there we are. That's given me this blank frame, which is what I want. Okay, so now with those two images captured, it just remains to go into Photoshop and do the post-production. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and I've loaded up the two files of the two images I captured earlier. This is the background image, and this one is the capture of the subject with the shadow down here. Okay, so the first stage in combining these two would be just to make a stack of those two images. Just go to File, come down to Scripts, and just click on Load Files into Stack. Ask it to add the open files, and I'm also going to ask it to attempt to automatically align. And just click on OK. And there we are, Photoshop has made me this new file So if I just go on to the top one here and just reduce the opacity, I can just check that everything is in line, which it appears to be. Good. So the first stage in this transformation would be to select just the pairs. And to do that, I'm just going to use the Object Selection tool. Now, if you have a look in your tool stack here and it's missing, you can put it in by just right-clicking on the three dots at the bottom of the tool stack there and go to Edit Toolbar. You can then bring in the Object Selection tool from the Extra Tools menu here. There we go. So with that on, I can just click on that and I make sure that the Object Finder isn't selected and that you're in the lasso mode at the top here. And then basically you just have to very roughly draw around the subject you want to keep. There we are. So that has selected all of those pairs, and I want to add now to the selection this pair on the end here. So if I hold down the Shift key on the keyboard, I can now draw another lasso around that particular pair like this, and that's now added to the selection. Okay, so the next thing to do would be to turn that selection into a mask, and the way to do that is just to add a mask at the bottom here. So that has now made me a mask and placed it on that layer. And you can see we're already getting there. We now have the pairs floating, but there's no shadow, so it doesn't look quite right. And there's no shadow, that's because the mask here has included the tea towel. So all I need to do is just paint onto the mask where I want the shadows to be. So making sure that I select white as the foreground colour, and just go to a paintbrush. I might make that a little bigger and relatively soft. Okay, and now I can just bring those shadows back in from the other picture, like so. And that just adds a little bit of authenticity to the whole image. Should you make a mistake, like I've just brought in the edge of the glass there, because you're just doing this on a mask, you can just change back to black and paint that bit back out again. In fact, what I might do is just make that a little smaller so it's easier to do. There we are. There. And there we have it. So by carefully applying the techniques when we captured the initial pictures, I've been able to preserve the highlight on the bottom side of the pairs as well as the highlights on the top. That makes the whole thing a little more believable. And together with the shadows cast onto the tea towel there, you really do think that they are just floating in midair. This final lighting trick relies on some careful staging, together with good lighting technique, and yes, a little smoke. No complicated equipment is required to produce this effect, just the right techniques. Okay, so here I have my table, and on this I'm just going to place a few pieces of wood just to make the base up. The base is actually a stepped set of slates. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is just place a couple of pieces of wood just on here, just like this. This will give a little bit of difference in height. But I don't want to leave them like this. I need to cover the whole table and these with some cloth, just to make the whole thing dark. So just place that over here, and basically I'm just making a black background, like so. And then on this I'm going to place some slate. So that builds up this three-dimensional base. So for the subject, I'm going to use a peony. So just placing this fairly carefully just on here. Okay, so to capture that, I'm going to use a medium format camera with an 80mm lens on it. And I'll just place the camera on the tripod. Like that. the next thing to do would be just to frame up the shot. There we are. I'll just use the back button focus here, just to get me a rough focus. There we are. Okay, so with all that done, the next thing to do would just be to take an image just with the house lights, just to see what sort of contamination, if any, I'm getting. Okay, so at these settings, I'm getting virtually no image. There is a slight image here, but I don't think I'll be worried about that. Okay, so the next thing to do would be to set a light. Now I'm going to use a studio flash for this, and I'm going to place the flash over the top here. Okay, so here I have a relatively small studio head, and on the front of that I've got this zoom reflector and some barn doors. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just swing this around so that it's over the subject, and I'm just going to pop this up in the air a little. Okay, so with that in something like the right position, and at an arbitrary energy level, I'll just grab an image and we'll just see what we've got. Okay, so straight away we can see that this is way overexposed. So I'm just going to take a couple of stops off that. So with that done, I'll just grab that again and we'll see what we get this time. There, that's much better. That's a full range of tones, I think. Next thing to do would be just to do something about the background. So what I'm going to do is just use a bit more cloth, and I'm just going to place that at the back here to form a background. There, so that should be enough to form a nice background. I'll just check that in the viewfinder. And there we are. So we now got a plain background in there, which is what we want. So at this stage, I've got a fairly normal lighting setup here, just with the light flooding everywhere, which is not what I want. I want a shaft of light to come down onto the subject. So that was achieved not with any fancy attachments to this, but just with a piece of card with a hole in it. So this is what I've got. So this is just a piece of mount board, and I've cut a hole in the center here. So what I'm going to do is just place a few stands around so that I can put the card over the top of the subject, something like that. So there we go. This is now in something like the correct position. I've just got a lab stand at the other end, a retort stand, and this is just the arm of this C stand. So it just supports the card enough to keep it in something like the right place. So in order to find out exactly where to put this, what I'm going to do is turn the modelling light on this light, and that should allow me to see where the spot of light is in the subject there. And now you should be able to see that I've got a spot of light which I can manoeuvre by just moving the card. And we'll turn off the modelling light. I'll just grab an image and see what I get this time. Okay, so that's considerably better. This is much more moody. It's just the sort of thing that I want. Okay, so the only thing which is missing now is a little bit of ethereal smoke. So to make that, I'm going to use a smoke machine. So this is the smoke machine that I'm using. It's just a small hobbyist one, really. You don't need anything drastic to do this. Any type of smoke machine will do it. But while we're waiting for that to warm up, I'll just reiterate what we've done with this piece of card. What I've actually done is just made a gobo, or go before optic. And basically what I'm trying to do here is get this as close to the subject as I can without it actually being in the picture. And with the light being quite a long way away from the surface of the card, it means that this will act like a point light source. Therefore, the light going through the hole will form a shaft which will go onto the subject, hopefully. Okay. So the smoke machine appears to be ready, so we're probably ready to capture some images. So what I'll do is just activate the smoke machine and grab a few images as the smoke goes through. There we are. So we'll have a look at those and see how we go. If I just go back through here, this is with no smoke. There. So we have varying degrees of smoke above the subject, forming that beam of light. So basically something like that, I think, is just about what I want. So by employing a few fairly simple lighting techniques, I've been able to create that shaft of light coming down, and together with a small amount of smoke, it's all created a very nice mood within the image. This is just a small selection from the videos that I've produced in the past year. I've left links in the comments below to the full videos where you can find more details on how to achieve these sort of results. Now, if you like watching these sort of things, do click on the other images as they appear, and don't forget to subscribe. Oh, and hit the like button. Thanks for watching.